How are you?
Good.
You having a good time today at VegFest?
Yes.
Excellent. Glad to hear that. So welcome. At this time, we are scheduled for making vegan cheese with traditional methods, which is a cooking demonstration with Susanna Romance. Please make sure your cell phones are silenced now. Make sure you refrain from taking videos or photos during the talk. VegFest is made possible by Northwest Veg and our sponsors, including Tofurkey, Book Publishing Company, Cafe Yum, Eventi, and Natural Awakenings. VegFest is one of dozens of events that Northwest Veg hosts each year, and if you're excited by VegFest, you can help support it in all our outreach by stopping by the Northwest Veg membership tables that are just inside the entrance of the exhibitor hall and becoming a member. Plus, when you join during VegFest, we thank you with a swag bag filled with all sorts of awesome products and coupons provided by our exhibitors. Susanna Romance is an educator and an expert in vegan cultured foods, especially vegan cheeses and yogurts. She manages Avellana Creamery, a vegan company that sells vegan cultures and educates foodies on the best ways to make cultured vegan cream sauces, cheeses, and other non-dairy alternatives using traditional methods. Please join me in welcoming Susanna Romance.
Is this thing on? Good? Okay, let me know if I need to do something. I don't know what I would do, but if I need to, just let me know. So, my name is Susanna Romance, and I'm the co-founder of Avellana Vegan Creamery, and I'm here today to explain to you the joys of making vegan cheese. So I do want to warn you, my day job is as a middle school teacher, and so my general form of communication is directed towards 11-year-olds. My joking style may be represented in that, so just as a little fair warning. And the other thing about that is I would never be able to bring a laser pointer into a 6th grade classroom for fear that they would steal it and start signaling jet airliners. So I brought my fancy pointer, but I don't really have much to point at, so I'm just going to let you know. Hey, so I'm going to start off by letting you know that Avellana means hazelnut in Latin, and you can just store that aside for a moment. My partner and I went vegan about 7 years ago. My partner texted me from work one day and said, I can never eat another animal product again. And so from being a full omnivore to a vegan, it was something that we had danced with for a while, and then just right out of the gate we went vegan. And I was, unfortunately, a cheese addict at that point. I was going through probably like a 10-pound log of Tillamook cheese every week. And, if there was surface area on my food, it had cheese on it. And so I went to the store to try to figure out, okay, what am I going to do the withdrawal symptoms had already set in, clammy hands, thumping heart, all those things. And so I went to the store and I looked to see what's available, and I started reading ingredient lists. And I was a little dismayed to find all the multisyllabic ingredients that were involved, and I brought some of them home, and some of them were awesome, and some of them I wasn't so happy with. And so I decided that I was going to make a good cheese using local hazelnuts. So coming to a hazelnut was an easy choice because obviously they grow locally here in the Pacific Northwest, and they are arguably the very best nut that exists. Sorry guys, I'll turn this way. And I went out, and the process was kind of interesting, actually, figuring out how to make a good vegan cheese. It's not as easy as you might think, especially when you think way too much. And so I prior to becoming vegan, I worked on a dairy goat farm. And one of the things that what I kind of envisioned myself like Laura Ingalls' gay older sister. She got written out of all the episodes, unfortunately. So in my frontierswoman movements, I found myself working at this goat farm, and I brought home a double quart jar of goat milk, and I started doing some research into history of cheese and old cheese recipes. And I learned how to cut the curd, which is the oldest way that they made cheese. They've been making it like that for thousands and thousands of years. They would carry their milk around in the empty gut of an animal, and the rennet, the digestive juices from the animal would cut the curd. And they realized that when you take water out of a food, it lasts longer, because the higher the moisture content, the more quickly it will spoil. And so the more water they were able to take out, the longer they could get it to last. And so they made hard cheeses, thousands and thousands of years ago in Sumeria, in Egypt, and a lot of these ancient civilizations. And so I did that, and I thought I'm doing really great. I braided my hair. It was a very short braid, but it was really awesome. I had a bonnet on. And, unfortunately, I didn't really like the cheese that I made that much, but I didn't tell anyone, because what kind of frontierswoman does not like fresh goat cheese? And so when we went vegan, I started thinking, I wonder, partly the reason why they put all that stuff in some of the vegan cheeses is it's fillers, it's to thicken it, and those kind of things. So I was like, well, what if I did the same thing that the ancients used to do, where you make milk and you take the water out of it. You cut the curd, you get the protein left behind, and then it's a natural thickening that people have been using for thousands of years. So I was like, okay, cool, that's what I'm gonna do. And so I picked a hazelnut. There's 3 hazelnuts right there. I picked up the hazelnuts to start my experimenting with. I went to the Hummingbird Wholesale in Eugene, Oregon, and I got a 5-pound bag of hazelnuts, and I started experimenting. And I made the milk. Making the milk was really easy, but cutting the curd was harder. And I made lots and lots and lots of really weird things. Bless my partner's heart, because we ate a lot of really weird things for several months while I was trying this out. And I succeeded in figuring out how to make curd. The way that I finally ended up succeeding was we were going onto the coast, and I had to take cheese curd with me. It's a long story. And so but I didn't have it made, and so I put it on the stove, and I put it on high, because when you're in a hurry, you do it too. Put it on high, and I walked away, and when I came back, there was this big bubbling mess of white goo, and it was curded, like really awesomely curded. And so I was like, oh, that's the trick, you boil the hell out of it. And so I went through the process. I made the curd, and I cultured it, and the resulting cheese was really, 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 really good. And so then when you make something that's really, 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 really good, the next natural step is to make a business out of it. And we ended up selling cheeses locally, online, and in stores in 4 different states, which was really fun for a while. So what are we doing now? We're not commercially making vegan cheeses any longer. The reasoning for that is pretty complicated. Mostly, it was because good vegan cheese is really expensive and cost prohibitive. And partly the reason for that is because you're using nuts that are not subsidized by the government, and you can use beans and things as well, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But the vegan cheese that we wanted to make, our mission statement was really, really pure. We wanted to use local nuts. We wanted to use organic nuts. We wanted to make sure we were paying people properly. It was my daughter. She made one, and I did usually. But so our mission statement was really it was set a high bar for ourselves. And when a distributor approached us, and he wanted to put our cheeses in some larger stores like Safeway and other places, we realized that the price point for a 3-ounce block of cheese was going to be about $17. And so we were at this point in our business where we realized we were going to have to sink a lot of money into production, and we were also going to be selling our cheeses to like the top maybe 20% of the vegans who we love and adore, and that didn't feel that great to us. And so we started to move into we like to teach stuff. And so we started to move more into this zone of what if we teach people how to make it instead? And I want people to know how to make good vegan cheeses at home. You can braid your hair and put on your bonnet, and you can wear, all people should braid your hair and wear bonnets. It's just really fun. And so I have been working on building up Avellana as a place where people can come and ask questions. They can buy cultures Oh. By cultures, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well later, tips and all kinds of recipes and things. So if I just got an indication that outside there's a little QR code. You can scan the QR code, and the recipe for what I'm going to show you is going to come up on your phone. So you'll get all this. There's a lot in here, so you'll get it all if you scan that QR code, and also if you visit Avellana Creamery, Avellana-creamery.com, and that'll be up on the screen here, and you can see a lot of cool stuff, if I don't say so myself. Okay, so this is the cheese recipe, and I have started off with a list of things you'll need. Some of them seem a little foreign, maybe. I don't know how much. I don't know how much fermentation you have done, and so some of you might be experts at this. You'll need a blender. Hold on, there. A nut milk bag, or a way to separate fiber from the nut milk. This is really fun. I really wish that I could do this at school. A pot and an acid, a drip out method, and I'll explain all this in a little bit. A culture for fermentation, and a fermentation station. That rhymes. Okay, so the blender. I really wanted to do a sound effect for this, so I didn't record one, or I didn't trust my techie skills, so I'm just going to do it. Are you ready, you guys? 11-year-olds love this stuff, I swear. You'll need to use a blender to make milk, which will then use to create curd and ultimately delicious vegan cheeses. The blender, so this is the whole point in making a really good milk. You really have to break up the cellulose cells that are in there. They're made to be really heavy duty. And so when you use a blender, I've had someone use a food processor before, and she said that it didn't actually come out that great because there's something about the blending action. And you don't have to use a Vitamix. I've used other blenders. I've used blenders that I got from Goodwill just to see if they would work, and I used Vitamix, and I used an Oster. And you can use other blenders. They may not last as long because it's hard on the motor. So you really have to blend it up really, really well to separate the stuff that tastes good, the fat and the protein. It's all locked inside, and you want to get the fiber off and have just the fat and the protein in there, and the sugar as well. Preparing the nuts. Soaking and sprouting. We soaked our hazelnuts. We sprouted them for 24 hours prior to making our cheeses commercially. We did it both ways to see if it made a big difference. And we found that sprouting the nuts beforehand produced a lot creamier of a cheese. For what reason, I'm not 100% sure. It may have had to do with taking, some of the enzymatic action in there may have affected the final result. Peeling if necessary. We peeled the hazelnuts. And the reason we peeled them is because hazelnuts actually, the skins have a lot of tannins in them, and they create like a blood red kind of color, and you'll see in the picture in a second here. My partner is a natural dyer, and she used the hazelnut water to dye scarves afterwards, and it kind of comes out a really cool pinkish color. So we peeled all of the hazelnuts beforehand. It doesn't really affect the flavor of the cheese if you leave them on. It might be a little more bitter, and your cheese will be pink. You'll see when the samples come out. I left some peels on some of the hazelnuts when I made the samples, and so some of the samples came out a little bit pink. You'll see it when if you take a look at it. The way that we peel hazelnuts is you bring them to a boil with a tablespoon of baking soda per cup of hazelnuts. I'm sure there are other ways to do it. I know, we ultimately also ended up using a giant potato peeler, a huge commercial potato peeler, which was really fun. It was like from 1950, and you got it for $200 off eBay. It was really cool, big old machine. But if you're going to do it by hand, you can just bring them to a boil with some baking soda, and you can, I just recently realized this, you can stir it really hard too with a whisk, and I bend the whisk so it has a little hole in it, and then you can just tap it on the side, and the peeled hazelnuts will fall out the hole, and the peels will stay on the whisk. It's cool, and it's fun. And it's way faster than we used to early on when we very first started making our cheeses commercially. We did it all by hand. We would do like 40-pound pounds of nuts all at one time by hand. And it was really not fun at all. So obviously, almonds are easy to peel. Cashews and most seeds you don't need to peel. Soybeans, I peeled the soybeans, and there's different methods for whatever you might want to use. I'm sure you can find if you have something really wacky that you want to make cheese out of. I've made cheese out of a lot of really wacky things, but there's almost always something somewhere online that tells you how to peel it if you want to. And like I said, it's not really necessary. That's what the dye looks like there. That's that blood red tannin water, and those are the hazelnuts that have floated up to the surface. And I just take a skimmer spoon and kind of skim off the hazelnuts and set them aside. Make a slurry. So you add the nuts and water, so a cup of nuts and 4 cups of water to a blender and blend it on high. There's a slurry photo. Separating the milk from the fiber. This is all just in the making the milk part of the process. Once you get the slurry of fiber, protein, and fat in your blender, you will need a way to separate the fiber out, making the non-dairy milk. You can use any number of ways to make this happen, and here are a couple. I'm going to do it again. There it goes. Pantyhose, pros. They're cheap, they're easy to find, they're effective, and they last a long time. Cons to pantyhose are that they're a petroleum product. They might leach chemicals into the milk. I don't know what kind of equipment that they're made on. And this is the worst one. I saved it for the last. It doesn't have an obvious singular noun form, so you always have to call it pantyhose, even if you are overusing it. Because I have tried. I did this talk before, and I called it what I thought the singular was, and it didn't really go very well, guys. Okay, so pantyhose method. There's what it looks like. I know it's kind of weird. You can really give it a good squeeze. You know, they make these things. I don't know. I don't wear pantyhose. I haven't worn them since I don't know, like I was 3 or something. And so people always talk about how they're so easy to get a snag. But I mean, I use the same pantyhose over and over for literally like months. And I did end up getting a snag in one more recently, but they do last forever. But if you don't like the pantyhose method, you can go with the commercially made nut milk bag. That's what they look like. And the pros are they're strong depending on what ones you get. You can find organic ones. We used Eco Peaceful. I still use Eco Peaceful when I'm not using pantyhose. And also it's now can very easily be made into a nut milk bag, nut milk bags. Okay, so the cons are they're a little more expensive. They're usually around $10 a bag, and they're a little harder to get, but you can get them on Amazon if you want to. Or probably a lot of stores have them now, too. If anybody has any questions, you can just toss your hand up and let me know, too. So this is kind of a cool thing. Once you have, and I don't know how many people take advantage of this, once you make hazelnut milk, you're left with that goof in the bag. You can spread it out on a cookie sheet and bake it at around 200 degrees. It takes a while. It takes hours to really get it to dry. But it dries in these kind of little clumps. But you can put it back in the blender and you can get this really awesome hazelnut flour. And we utilize that as well. We sold that when we were doing commercial cheeses. And it's really fun to cook with. It's defatted. So a lot of the hazelnut flours that you'll see now at stores, they're not defatted. They're kind of just like the ground up nut. And so the defatted flour, hazelnuts are super greasy, and this is a lot easier to work with once you're done. And you can do this with any of the nut stuff that you use. Dry it out and then rerun it back through the blender, and it's really cool. Oh yeah, so this is I'm working on this invention. And I'm going to show it to you. So I had this idea that we should be able to use our blender to make hazelnut milk. And so I had this prototype made. It's super rough, but this is my idea. It has the bottom, like the Vitamix bottom with it, or there's another one. There's a couple other blenders that have that 12-point driver on them. And you just make your slurry with the Vitamix, and then you just drop this on there, and it's got this, it spins, So you drop this on there. This doesn't work right yet, but so then you put this on top, and then you can just pour your slurry in here, and you've got the high centrifugal force in there that's really slinging it out, so that the flour that comes out is a lot drier. And so this is my invention. Someday, you guys, you are going to have one of these in your kitchen. You're going to be like, that girl, that frontiers woman. Okay. Here's just a couple of pictures of my invention in my life. Okay, add an acid. So you've got your hazelnut milk. And you have squeezed it out through the nut milk bag or the pantyhose, and you are now going to add an acid to it. So, okay, I'm not going to do it this time because it would just really be starting to get old. But once you get the milk separated out, the next step is to cut the curd. In order to do this, you need to add an acid, and I use apple cider vinegar because it is healthy, cheap, has a long shelf life, and it's easy to find. You can also use lemon juice. You can use other kinds of vinegar. I've used all kinds of vinegar in a pinch. Because you know, when you're in a pinch, when you really got to get that vegan cheese out, and all you have is balsamic, you can use that. You really can. So then, you boil the heck out of it. Here we have, or this used to be on our website, but it's not on our website anymore. This is a lady. She's boiling the heck out of some hazelnut milk. And this is another lady. She's eating a piece of cheese, vegan cheese, I'm sure. And this guy, I'm not sure what he's doing, but he spilled a little bit of his front there. But this is just a really cute picture we used to have on our website. One of the things about Avellana Creamery, and I was going to say this earlier and I forgot, was that when we had our vision for what we wanted to do, part of it and part of our thought process was taking things that people have done for a really long time. You know how they say when you're evolving, you're kind of spiraling back over the same thing? You're just repeeling a new layer off. So our idea was that we're still making cheese, we're still doing it, but now we're going to bring it up to a whole nother level. We're going to do it without having an animal stomach, draped over our back. We're going to do it where we're making hazelnuts that are grown organically and locally. So it's kind of that feeling of taking the old but bringing it up a level. And so we use a lot of this imagery on our website. Some of these kind of old antiquity, alchemical kind of photographs and images. So we boil the milk. Add the acid. It causes the proteins to unravel. This was a really cool thing for me to realize that when you're adding in that acid, all those proteins, they just unroll. And that's why things taste different once you've curdled them. It's because you've opened them up and you've kind of given it a much higher, we got a question back here?
How much acid do you add?
It is, for hazelnut milk, it's a tablespoon per cup of nuts. So when you, it doesn't really matter how much water you use. I base almost everything off of how many nuts I use because that's the action that needs to happen. So a tablespoon per cup of nuts. And I think that that's pretty across the board as well, what I've done with some other things with almond milk and sunflower seeds as well. So you will need to bring the milk to a boil to complete the curding process. Here's a couple pictures. You can see this is prior to boiling. You can already see the water is kind of cut apart, or the whey, or whatever you would like to refer to it as. And you can see that the texture of the milk, this actually has probably been heated up a little bit. It wouldn't look like that right off the bat. But soy milk, if you add an acid to soy milk and you curd it, I don't know, you may have done this before, it thickens up right away. You don't have to bring it to a boil. And when you do bring it to a boil, then it becomes really pronounced. But you can thicken soy milk a lot just by adding apple cider vinegar to it, and it tastes really good too. So that's what it looks like when you're walking away from it on high. And the drip out. At this point, you have removed the fiber from the milk, and you have curdled it. Now you need to remove the excess water that you added in order to make curds. Oopsie. There we go. So basically, this is a behind-the-scenes look here. There it is. So I just, when I'm doing a little bit, I just use a colander like that, and I cover it up with a towel. If you're ever doing a lot, and we use these big pots, we stretch that around the outside of that, and we use that hemp cloth on the inside there. So if you get it tight enough, it'll be strong enough to, without the colander. So you don't need a colander either. You could just use a napkin and use an elastic band. But, you know, for quickness sake, this probably drips out a little more slowly than if you just use the cloth, but it works well. Colander, napkin, dishcloth, and a big elastic band. You just need to watch and make sure that your level of water is not coming up to touch the bottom of whatever it is that you're dripping out. And sometimes I'll just dump it off and then start it back again. This is our Avellana cultures and some salt. You have to culture the curd. And some people like it really salty, some people don't like it that salty at all. But you can do it however salty you would like. At the culture here, we're going to actually have some of these if anybody's interested in picking one up. We're going to have some outside. It's the infinitesimal amount that you need to add to the cheese in order to get it to culture. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Flavoring the curd, these are all the spices you can use. We used Italian herb, smoked paprika, curry, and berbera. Berbera is really good. I don't know what they put in it, but wow, it's tasty. Actually, I probably could guess some of the things they put in it, but it's really, really good. And it goes along really well with the hazelnut base as well. So then you've got your cheeses, and you let them culture for around 48 hours in this form here. So, oh my God, what am I thinking? This form here, you'll see. So I let it drip out, and I just drip it out and long enough to where I can form it into whatever shape I want. You don't, or I should probably not practice with that thing. It's kind of a little dangerous. So you can also, if you would prefer to put it into a mold, that's how you can also buy cheese molds. We also use the silicone, like mini bread loaf molds. You can use those. You have to add some place for the moisture to drip out. If you're using it still kind of wet, you can put it in a mold, and then it will get the kind of cool, whatever, if you want to put indentations on it or whatever, it will take whatever form the mold is in. And then you're culturing it either in this form like this or in your mold for 48 hours. If you do it in a mold, you'll need to flip it over and take the mold out after the first 24 hours. The fermentation station, which rhymes, needs to be at 100 to 110 degrees consistently for 48 hours. And so this is the thing that blocks up a lot of people. It doesn't have to be super complicated. And I have some ideas here. My oven doesn't go as low as 200, but my oven is really, really old. So I think that my mom said she can get hers to do, not 200, 100. 200 I think is the lowest mine will go. Yeah?
Can you use a dehydrator for that purpose?
Oh, yeah. I actually just saw someone who said that they used a dehydrator. The only thing about a dehydrator is that it could potentially, depending on the kind of dehydrator, just dry the outside of the cheese out a little bit. But if you're cool with that, then that should work. Or you could even cover it with something like an upside down bowl or something if you've got one. Because ours is has a lot of airflow in it, and I think that it might dry out the edges of the cheeses a little. But it would work probably with a little tinkering. Yeah?
If you use the Instant Pot, do you put it on regular, low, or high?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
On the yogurt feature, right?
Yeah, I would use it on the yogurt feature. My sister has used a crock pot for it. She turned it on really low, and if she covered it up, then it got too hot, but uncovered, it wasn't too hot. So a crock pot really low, Instant Pot on the yogurt feature.
Well, the yogurt has 3 settings. It has low, regular, or high.
Yeah. So what I do if I'm using a new one, a new source that I've never used before, I will turn it on and test it over a period of a few hours just to see where it's at. So you need a little thermometer and just check and see where it's hanging out at, and you can adjust for that purpose. If it's too low, the culture that I use, it has like a heat, it's got a heat range where it wants to be, and too high and it will die. So you can't, I mean, you have a bit of play, like I've done it anywhere between 80 degrees actually will start to culture, but what happens is the cheese doesn't really dry out fast enough, and so it's a little too moist and it can start to mold if you're keeping it at 80. I have gone up to 120, and that will dry the cheese out a lot more quickly, so you wouldn't want to leave it in there for as long, and it wouldn't have as high of a culture. So there's some playroom in there. You can mess around with it and see what works best for you. And also different areas, different things are going to have different airflow as well, so that could also affect. And I'm really into just messing around with it and seeing how it works. I think that's really fun, but I don't like it when it gets ruined. That's not fun. Yeah?
If you're using the crock pot, do you have to elevate it away from the heat source?
I would, yeah. Just because if it's sitting on the bottom, it's a lot hotter right up directly on the bottom. So I think that what my sister did was kind of like a double boiler effect, where she set a bowl in there and then put it in the bowl. So yeah.
Can you culture it?
Yeah.
Or is that at room temperature?
Yes, you can culture it at room temperature. Well, actually, I'm gonna back that up a little bit. It depends on what culture you're using. Some cultures require you to bring whatever you're culturing up to a certain temperature, so you'll need to check if it's like, some people crack open like a acidophilus tablet or something. With those guys, it's a little bit harder to tell where its spot is, because you don't really know what all's in there and what it's, I mean, you can read the label, but who has time for that? So you can do that, but if I was going to do something like an acidophilus culture, I would actually, I would probably heat it up to like around 80 or 90 degrees first, just to kind of give it a kickstart. But so it really kind of depends on what culture you use. Yeah.
Speaking of mold, have you worked with molds and cheese?
A little tiny bit, not a lot. It's something that I think is really cool. And I've done a little bit of getting the white mold on the outside, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert in that. But I've definitely played around with it a little bit. It's cool. When you can start getting those things going and working on your side, it's pretty. Laura Ingalls will be happy with us if we did that regularly. So, and to get back to your question, the culture that we use, you can do it at room temperature, and then wild culturing is a little bit different too. That's got its whole other. We'll talk a little bit more about that. If you still have a question when I'm done, then I'll check in with you. DIY fermentation stations, they don't have to be too fancy. These are two really janky pictures. And this one is the inside of my oven with a thermometer. Like I said, I just put that light bulb in there to see what I could get it up to, and I think I got it up to like 82 or 85 with just a light bulb in there. And this is just soy milk. A lot of times we'll just culture soy milk. You can just put a little scoop of culture in soy milk, and you can make really good soy yogurt for super duper cheap, and you can use it in everything. I use it for chip dip, I use it for like fettuccine alfredo, I use it for beef stroganoff, all sorts of really yummy, a base for a lot of things. I know some people can't do soy, but you can use, I also made a yogurt out of garbanzo beans and cashew mixed together, which also makes a really delicious yogurt. This is just a, oh my God. I'm out of practice. This is a wine box from Trader Joe's wrapped up in a chenille blanket with a little thermometer poking out of it. This is kind of like, this works. This actually did get up to 110. And it has a heating pad inside of it. It's not just a blanket. That would be some blanket. So it has a heating pad inside of it. If your box isn't too big, you can get it pretty warm in there, actually. You definitely have to wrap it up, though, to kind of block out the heat from slipping out the cracks.
Question.
Yes? Sure.
I was wondering, at which point do you add the flavorings for the cheeses?
Okay, cool. So you make the milk, you curdle the milk, you drip off the water, and that's when you culture it. if you're going to put it into a mold, you would put the spices in the mold and then put the curd in the mold on top of it. And if you have dripped it out enough to where you can form it, then you can put the spice on the outside.
What if there's like fruit in it? What if there's like fruit in the cheese?
Fruit?
Do you do anything different? Because what if the fruit spoils?
That's also a really good question. I have done a little bit with blueberries, and your point is correct that they will mold it because there's a lot of moisture in the berries. We've used dried berries instead, or the other thing is I would wait and maybe do some kind of flavoring if you wanted to put like a little sweetener in the curd, and then wait and put the fruit stuff on last as you're serving it. That's a really good point. Yeah.
Say cultured, are you like sprinkling it on or poking it or?
I just stir it in and then form it.
Okay.
Yep,
So
it's
before the form.
sprinkle and form, yeah. Yep. Was there another question over here? Yeah.
In the culture of the soy yogurt, what, is that a particular kind of culture you use to make your?
Yeah, and I keep going back to my own culture, which is, that's what I use all the time is the culture that we use for our cheeses.
How do you make it like from scratch?
The culture that we have is prepared by this genius of probiotic maker in California, and we get it from him, and we sell it through that. So,
So you sell the cultures?
yes, we're going to have some for sale today at the end of the talk. You can use other things as well.
I've gotten them from Cultures for Health. Are you familiar with that website?
Yes, I am, yeah.
But there's a cost, of course, to the cultures.
Yeah, the Cultures for Health, I'm going to hold on to that, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, and I'll come back to that. So this is what the finished cheese looks like. There's going to be some samples coming out here in a little bit. What's the point of using cultures? So you probably already know that cultured foods are good for you. This is interesting, and I did not know this prior to getting into this, but even heat-killed probiotics, like if you make something, you culture it, and then you cook it, heat-killed probiotics, it works on a whole different section of health in your body. So live probiotics is one thing, and then heat-killed probiotics is another thing. So when you're making like a soy yogurt, I was always like, oh man, I feel so bad, and I'm like pouring them in. They don't have a nervous system either, so it's not really like that. But they help, since they're pre-digesting your food, they help with the digestive process, and they kind of calm your digestion and help in a totally different way than live probiotics do. So I just thought that was pretty cool. They kill pathogenic bacteria in your food, and they fight inflammation, which is, I think that's, once you're past the age of like 40, I think inflammation becomes like the third word on your phone, you know, the word suggests, it's like inflammation. So here's a really cool picture of some sauerkraut and a really cool picture of some pickles. That was just for fun. So what's the point of using cultures continued? People have, they used to culture food a long, long time ago because it made it last longer and it made it taste really good. And now, you know, when we went through that whole series of time where everybody was kind of into convenience and they were canning stuff and freezing stuff, then we kind of got away from culturing stuff as a way to preserve it. And so transportation of food has become lightning fast, that we can eat fresh vegetables all year round. But more and more doctors and naturopaths and scientists are recommending a return to cultured food for health and well-being, just because of all those things that I was talking about: inflammation, gastrointestinal health, even gut health. They were connecting. You may have heard this. They are connecting gut health with your emotional well-being as well, which is some pretty cool stuff. This is actually an ancient Sumerian beer recipe. It's from about 5,000 years ago. So they, in the Mesopotamians, is, you probably heard of Ninkasi beer, but Ninkasi was actually the goddess of fermentation. And so there's all these really cool sculptures of her like fermenting barley and these big clay urns. So that's a cuneiform recipe, 5,000-year-old cuneiform recipe for fermentation. Culturing controlled versus wild. Culturing foods has been happening for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, which I said a few times already. There are two ways to culture food. There's a wild ferment and a controlled ferment. And wild ferment is what people used to use a lot, and that's the reason why certain cheeses have to come from a certain region sometimes in order to be called that kind of cheese, because they're using the wild ferment from the air, basically whatever is present in their air due to their ecosystem and their flora and fauna to make that cheese. And so a wild fermentation is really awesome, and it has some drawbacks, especially if you are on a time limit. When you're using a wild version, you're relying on microorganisms that are naturally present in the air and whatever you're trying to ferment already. So like fruits and vegetables and seeds and nuts, they already come with a little host of microorganisms on them that you can use to ferment them. When you use a controlled ferment, you add a culture that gives the process a head start, and it helps to regulate the final product. So these are our cultures. I would never try to sell something that I thought wasn't like super awesome and gonna make things a lot easier. They're gonna cut down fermentation time, they're reducing the amount of pathogenic bacteria, and they reduce the risk of bad molds. Black molds, things that it's really frustrating to put like, $10 worth of hazelnuts into a project and have that come out yucky. And they produce a delicious and super powered probiotic ferment. So our cultures don't contain thickeners or preservatives. You'll notice in Cultures for Health, if you read the ingredients, they do have, maltodextrin in them. And maltodextrin is it's a fructo oligosaccharide, and it has a whole lot of different things that they use it for in a lot of different food products. You'll see it all over the place, but it's got some questionable health negatives for it. So our cultures don't have any soy or gluten. A lot of people will make cultures on barley or soy, and so if you have a food allergy, that can keep you from eating it or using it. And ours is made on a really specific mixture of rices. And because of the super high potency of our product, just a tiny little bit does a massive amount of work. The amount that you put in is like 3 sand grains or 4 sand grains worth for a quart of milk. You'll see, and you don't have to heat the milk up or anything. You can just toss it in there and put it in wherever it's going, and come back in 8 hours, 8 to 12 hours, and you've got yogurt, and it's really awesome. It reduces the amount of work required for yogurt recipes, and you can use acidophilus tablets if you want to. You can use yogurt starts from the store. All those things work. The question is you don't know how many colony-forming units you have in each one. So the store ones, they could have been stored improperly, or and also the same thing with acidophilus. It's hard to know what you're getting all the time when you're buying something like that. Yes.
Yeah, question about culturing yogurt. I thought that you had to boil the milk in order to denature the protein in order for the thickening process to happen. I thought that was the reason.
What kind of milk are you talking about? Like soy milk? You don't have to? No, it really depends on the culture that you're using. So if you have a powerful enough culture, it will go through and it will do to the proteins what it needs. It will unravel what it needs to unravel, and basically it's creating food for itself as it's going through that process.
Okay, so it's the strength of the
That's a-
culture.
Yeah, in a simplified version, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Can you use a processing of cheese and yogurt and coconut milk?
Yes, I actually haven't done it, but somebody at one of my other talks talked about it and said that as long as you take the watery part of the coconut milk, just use the cream part, and that cultures up really nicely. So if I've tried it before and I didn't have very good success, and so I kind of put it in the no-go zone. But other people have told me that they've had a lot of success, but just taking off the water part. Yeah, it's back there.
If you make the yogurt with your culture and then you save some of it to be a starter for
Yes.
the next
Mhm.
batch?
Yep,
Okay.
you can definitely do that. So, oh, you'll get the same results every time. So that's another thing about using even wild fermentation, and this is true of any commercially produced culture. It's gonna save, it does kickstart that process, and so you're not having to wait quite as long to get the natural stuff to come in, and then you're not gonna, so cultures are really, really intense. They view pathogens as their enemy, and so if something tries to come in and land on your thing that you're culturing, it's gonna go out and take care of that. So if you use a really good, strong culture, you're gonna have a lot less funky stuff happening in your product. Yes.
I have one other question.
Yeah. Mhm.
Is this gonna work with a commercial soy milk if you don't have time to?
Yes. I use it with, my favorite kind of soy milk is Eden unsweetened. The Eden unsweetened soy milk is so good. And so I do this like maybe 3 times a week. I fill up a quart jar, I put a little sprinkle of cultures in it, and I put it in our little fermentation station and pull it out in 12 hours. And we use it 3 or 4 times a week on various things, mostly chip dip, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, that's all. And I've used it on, the school that I work in offers soy yogurt as an alternative to vegan and dairy-free students, and they use that culture, and they've used it on the, is it Kirkland, the Costco brand soy milk, and it works really well on that. The only thing is that you have to, I just take the whisk and I put it down in the jar and I just go like this, and it makes it really smooth. Otherwise it can, yogurt gets that kind of, almost like, not gelatinous, but, you guys know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. I just have to share a disaster. I tried, it was a Cultures for Health packet that I used with the silk almond milk, and it just did not work at all.
Yeah, so,
And
one
I
of the,
don't know if this is the almond milk or the silk brand or what, but it just.
One of the things about that is that with Cultures for Health, they do, because you have to bring the milk up to a certain temperature, and if it doesn't kickstart, if they've not been stored properly, that's one thing that happens. If the temperature zone doesn't get optimally met and retained at a long enough level, then they can die. There's a lot of different things that go into creating a super duper potent culture. I think, honestly, wild cultures, I almost prefer, as far as like, well, I mean, you can't use a wild culture to culture milk. You could set it out for a while, But as far as when you're using those commercially based things, you kind of got to play around with it a lot and see if you're not using it a lot, you have to play around with it and see what's going on. And I've had a couple of disasters as well. It's hard not to have disasters when you're playing with them. When you are braiding your hair and you have on your bonnet, the Ingalls had a lot of disasters, as you know. There was a question, yeah.
I think I missed a step. So how do you get the culture into the drained curds before you culture it in the
So it's just
fermentation station?
Yeah, it's just a powder. You just put the powder in and stir it up. Yeah,
Okay,
along
so-
with salt.
So the curds are still liquidy enough. Is that before you drain them?
It's kind of like no, it's not before you drain it. You would drain it first because otherwise some of your culture is going to go out in the water. So you culture it after you drain it. And the consistency, let's go back here. The the curd is gonna be, wow, we have covered so much stuff, you guys. So this is what it looks like. And this is sort of like, almost like cottage cheesy. You can break it up. And you would want to drip it out in the refrigerator if you're going to go to this dry, because the longer it takes you to dry out, the more things are going to start getting in there. So with this dryness, I would drip it out in the refrigerator. If you were going to do it with, you can also do it with this dryness here. But you would want to put it in a mold or something. I lost you. There you are. Did I cover it up? No, I didn't. You'd want to put it in a mold, so otherwise it's just going to turn into a cheese pancake.
So back to that other drier version, then you just stir it into that?
It's been stirred in and then formed into this shape. So yeah, it looks kind of like cottage cheese. You stir it in and then you pack it up into a little cheeseburger. Yeah.
Is there ever a point when dealing with the cultures that you want to like avoid something like metal utensil?
I don't really mess too much with that because it's too time consuming for me to try to think of. Metal for me has never been an issue. I'll put it in. I'll use metal utensils and it's never been a problem. Yeah. I think that some people are there are different styles with fermentation. Some people are like super clean, and I mean, not that I'm not clean, but I don't mess with like not letting metal touch it. But there's purists, and then there are people who are like, let's go for this and see what happens. And sometimes I think that the metal thing, I've never had an issue with it. Yeah.
When you're adding the salt along with the culture, you said that some prefer a lot of salt, some prefer a little bit of salt. Is there a minimum you need for aggregation or for preserving?
No, if I was going to put not very much salt on the inside of the culture, I might turn my proofing up a degree, and you can also sprinkle even just a tiny bit on the outside of it, because that will help with anything that might land on the outside of the cheese. So I haven't found that the only times that I've ever molded a cheese by accident was when I forgot about it and I left it for way too long. So. Okay, now we have to go all the way back through. Let's see. Where were we? I know, and I'm almost out of time, so I'm gonna speed through here. Oh yeah, this is almost my last slide. So I just wanted to talk a tiny little bit about some of the things that you can use, and I've kind of touched base a little bit on these different ideas. I am constantly on the prowl to find a really good melty cheese, stretchy cheese recipe that doesn't have tons of weird stuff in it. And so I actually just finished a really weird one. And we ended up making a broccoli cheese out of it, a broccoli cheese soup out of it. It was super, super weird. But as soon as I get it, and I go get it at some point, I'm going to post it on my website. So that's it, you guys. And this is our website. You can go on there and check out. There's tons of recipes on there.